So we are gathered here, members of the Tibetan Bay Area community, instead of the usual Tibetan New Year, which we call Losar, celebrations. This year we are all joining in a global grassroots movement to express our resistance towards the Chinese oppression in Tibet. Everything that is going to be said here today, and even in the feelings that come across in our silence on this very auspicious day, usually in our calendar, it's one of the days that is most celebrated, as we all know. We have chosen to not celebrate Losar this year. And it's not because this was planned from outside a few Tibetans, but by word of mouth from inside Tibet. On this occasion, I have a message for the leadership of China. And I'm going to read you a letter that I wrote to Premier Jintao. My name is Dechen Tsering, and I join millions of Tibetans in not celebrating the Tibetan New Year, Losar, today, as an act of defiance against Chinese government's occupation of Tibet, and showing my steadfast solidarity with Tibetan sisters and brothers inside Tibet. Instead of the usual New Year card, here is a letter for Mr. Jintao. I call it a Losar message for who? Premier Jintao, with the Chinese New Year having just passed, it is difficult for us as Tibetans to wish you Happy New Year, given the destruction you have led and condoned in Tibet, particularly since last March. It is clear from the buildup of military across the Tibetan plateau that you and your comrades are angered by the refusal of Tibetans to not be bribed into celebrating New Year with you. Your Strike Hard campaign that started on January 18, 2009, attempted to head off trouble, but in fact, the campaign of conducting house-to-house searches, arrests of Tibetans without any evidence of wrongdoing, monitoring internet cafes and cell phones for information that you consider a danger to state security, have done nothing but cut deeper into the gaping wounds of last March. No doubt you and your comrades wanted Tibetans to celebrate New Year alongside with the Chinese New Year, so that you could showcase what a harmonious society you have established inside Tibet to the world. Take a 53-year-old man in a village in Gansu province who recounts how security forces came in January to his village and tried to enforce celebrations by a system of collective responsibility. I quote here, 10 days before Chinese New Year, the police came and divided us into groups of 20 families and put 1 or 2 people in charge. They were given a few thousand yuan and told they were responsible for ensuring Tibetans will celebrate. That they would be punished if there were no celebrations, he explained. Later they came and arrested 9 people who they said were ringleaders in the refusal campaign, even though they, the 9 people, had nothing to do with it. End quote. The attempts by the Chinese authorities to force Tibetans to move forward our New Year to coincide with the Chinese New Year celebrations has sparked a grassroots movement that has gone global. Our movement is to boycott festive celebrations during the Tibetan New Year and use the occasion to mourn our sisters and brothers whom your paramilitary have killed since last March. If you are tempted to resort to the same old response that a handful of Tibetan splitters are doing this, and that it is the quote-unquote Dalai clique that instigated this, please think again, Mr. Hu. The movement began inside Tibet, and you have no one to blame except the historical failure of your government in handling the dissent inside Tibet. As one Tibet scholar I respect says, China is suffering from a crisis of governance inside Tibet. As one fellow Tibetan inside Tibet put it plainly today, we didn't celebrate anything this year because we have nothing to celebrate. Your policies inside my homeland this past year have caused hundreds of deaths, thousands of arrests, torture, detentions, not to mention the countless who are still missing after being detained by Chinese police. Even as I write you this letter, which I have no idea if you will read, but many others I hope will, thousands of Chinese paramilitary with loaded weapons are moving into various towns and cities of Tibet to increase your repressive policies of a lockdown in the Tibetan plateau, while media and tourism inside Tibet are banned until April 1st, 2009. According to the One Times online article on February 20th, 2009, and I quote, columns of army vehicles have been seen clogging narrow mountain roads into Tibetan populated regions of southwestern Sichuan province in the past few days. Soldiers have been sent out from the Chengdu military region, one of 7 military commands in China, along with members of the paramilitary's People's Armed Police. Their numbers could amount to as much as 2 divisions, as many as 20,000 men. But such numbers could not be confirmed in a country in which all military movements are a state secret. The troops have been permitted to carry loaded weapons, a rare and extreme measure for soldiers operating within China's national borders, local sources have said. Quote, end quote. We know, Mr. Hu, your policies are to conduct more unwarranted arrests based on pure suspicion and fear. As you know very well, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the first national uprising in Tibet on March 10, 1959. According to a Reuters article yesterday, your government, Mr. Hu, plans to use the 50th anniversary to, and I quote here, to argue that its spending, schools, and religious policies have done far more for Tibetans than the Dalai Lama and his calls for full regional autonomy, end quote, have done. Here's a challenge for you, Mr. Hu. Can you try to prove that without a single shot of a gun at a peaceful Tibetan protester? Can you try to prove that without arrests that are unwarranted? Can you do that without dictating policies that strip basic human rights of Tibetans? And most importantly, if you are so confident of your argument, can we hear that from the grassroots Tibetans inside Tibet, rather than from your puppet leadership in the Tibetan plateau? If, indeed, you have done more for Tibetans, why then, I ask you, Mr. Hu, are you and your policies the target of all past, present, and future protests inside Tibet? Let's talk about the so-called democratic reform and self-emancipation of Tibet that your government is imposing on Tibetans inside Tibet. Have you ever wondered why, after 50 years of so-called liberation, emancipation, democratic reform, and development, hundreds of Tibetans all over the Tibetan plateau took to the streets over 30 cities around the plateau last March to voice their dissent of your government's repressive policies? Or have you even stopped to think why 37,000 lower